I was left alone at the nursing home on Christmas. Then the nurse handed me a letter that changed everything. I wore my best cardigan and waited by the window all Christmas Day. My son didn't call. No one came. I ate alone while the other residents laughed with their families. Then a nurse walked in and handed me a letter. It wasn't from my son, but it was from someone I did not expect to still be around. Before I begin my story, I just want to say thank you for listening to me pour my heart out. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me more than you know. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Christmas morning used to smell like pine needles and coffee brewing strong. My late wife Margaret used to wake up before dawn, humming carols while she prepared the turkey. I'd sit in my old recliner, watching her dance around the kitchen in her red apron, pretending to complain about the early hour but secretly loving every moment. Even when times were hard, when money was tight and gifts were few, our house felt alive with warmth and possibility. But this morning, when I woke up to the sterile hum of the nursing home corridor and the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, all I could smell was the antiseptic they used to mop the floors. It was Christmas and I was completely alone. I got up slowly, my joints protesting every movement. The arthritis in my hands reminded me it had been a cold night. The pain settled deep in my bones like an unwelcome visitor who'd decided to stay. I didn't complain. What was the point? I just breathed through it and reached for my cardigan, the navy blue one with the wooden buttons that Margaret had given me for our 40th anniversary. I'd laid it out carefully the night before, hoping against hope that today might be different. I didn't have any holiday pins or festive ties left. Those had been packed away when my son Robert moved me into this place 3 years ago. I wasn't given much choice in what came with me. "It'll be good for you, Dad," he'd said, avoiding my eyes as he signed the papers. "People who can take proper care of you." As if I hadn't taken care of him for 18 years, taught him to throw a baseball, helped him with his homework, walked the floors with him when he had nightmares, and no amount of comfort seemed enough. But I didn't argue. I nodded. I let him make the decision for both of us. The dining hall was already half full by the time I made my way down. Wheelchairs and walkers lined up like a slow parade of forgotten souls. Some of the residents had visitors, children and grandchildren leaning down to press kisses on weathered foreheads, little ones giggling too loud, holding presents that rustled with anticipation. I nodded politely at a few of the staff members. Maria, one of the newer nurses, gave me a warm smile as she arranged small glasses of orange juice on the tables. I found my usual seat near the large window that faced the parking lot. Every few minutes, a car would pull in, headlights cutting through the gray morning, tires crunching on the salted pavement. I kept my eyes fixed there longer than I should have, longer than was dignified for a man my age. A part of me, the part that still remembered hope, imagined one of those cars might be Robert's. Maybe he'd walk through those doors carrying one of Margaret's old cookie tins, filled with the sugar cookies she used to make. Maybe he'd surprise me, tell me he wanted to spend the day together, maybe even take me out for a drive around the old neighborhood. But he didn't come. By 11 o'clock, most of the visitors had taken their loved ones back to their rooms for private celebrations. Soft instrumental Christmas music played from speakers mounted in the corners. I could hear someone down the hallway exclaiming over a gift, their voice echoing with genuine joy and surprise. I took a few bites of the scrambled eggs they'd served. They were rubbery and over-salted, but warm. I didn't complain. I never do anymore. Maria passed by my table and touched my shoulder gently. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, her accent adding warmth to the words. I managed a smile and shook my head. "No, dear. I'm just enjoying the view." She smiled back, but I could tell she saw through my polite facade. She had that kind of heart, that intuitive understanding that comes from caring for forgotten people every day. I stayed in the dining hall longer than necessary. I didn't want to return to my room, not because it was uncomfortable, but because it reminded me too sharply of the space they put you in when you're no longer anyone's priority. I tried to make it feel like home with what little I'd been allowed to bring: a framed photo of Margaret and me from our wedding day, a crocheted afghan she'd made during her last winter, and a small wooden cross that had belonged to my father. But no amount of personal touches could disguise what it really was: a waiting room between this life and whatever comes next. I finally wheeled myself back to my room around 1:30. I turned on the small television mounted in the corner, some black and white Christmas movie flickering across the screen. Jimmy Stewart was learning about the value of his life from an angel, surrounded by people who loved him. I muted the sound. I didn't want to hear about miracles and second chances and how wonderful life could be when you realized what you had. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the light outside gradually shift from pale morning gray to the deeper shadows of afternoon. The sun was sinking behind the row of bare oak trees that lined the facility's back fence. I could hear laughter from down the hallway. Someone's grandchildren had brought matching Christmas sweaters, and they were taking photos by the artificial tree in the lobby. Then there was a knock on my door. Soft, respectful, the kind of knock that asks permission rather than demands attention. I looked up to see Maria standing in the doorway, holding something in her hand. "Mr. Thompson, I almost forgot," she said, stepping into the room. "This was dropped off at the front desk this morning. The person who brought it specifically asked that it be delivered today, on Christmas. It's addressed to you." She held out a cream-colored envelope, and I could see my name written across the front in careful, elegant handwriting: Harold James Thompson. The penmanship was old-fashioned, the kind they used to teach in schools when handwriting mattered, when people took time to make their letters beautiful. I blinked in surprise. I hadn't received a personal letter in years, decades, maybe. Bills, yes. Advertisements and medical statements, certainly. But a real letter, written by hand and delivered with intention? My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for it. "Do you know who brought it?" I asked. Maria shook her head. "Just someone who said they were visiting the area. Not a family member, but they said you'd understand who it was from once you read it." She gave my shoulder another gentle squeeze and left me alone with the mystery in my hands. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Not because I was afraid, I'd lived too long to be frightened by surprises, but because something in my chest had begun to stir, some long-dormant instinct that recognized this moment as significant. My body seemed to know, even before my mind did, that this wasn't just another piece of mail. I opened the envelope slowly, almost reverently, like I was unwrapping something sacred. The paper inside was thick and smooth, folded with care. I unfolded it once, then again, and read the first lines. "Dear Harold, I don't know how to begin this letter without my hands shaking. My name is David Mitchell, and I believe I'm your son." My heart stopped. The words seemed to float off the page, rearranging themselves in the air before settling back into meaning. I read them again, more slowly this time, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. "Your son. My son. For 57 years, I had believed I'd fathered a child who died before I ever held him. That's what they told me in 1967, when I was barely 23 years old, scared out of my mind, and too young to know the right questions to ask. Margaret and I weren't married yet, we were engaged, planning a wedding for the following spring. When she told me she was pregnant, we moved the date up, but she started having complications in her 7th month. The baby came early. Too early, they said. He didn't make it through the night. They wouldn't let me see him. Better this way, the doctor had said, his voice clinical and cold. Sometimes it's easier to move forward if you keep the memory clean. I was young and devastated and didn't know I had the right to demand answers. Margaret was sedated, lost in her own grief, and I was left to handle the arrangements alone. There was no funeral, no grave to visit, no name to whisper in prayer. Just a void where our first child should have been, and the quiet understanding that we would never speak of it again. But here I was, 80 years old and forgotten in a nursing home, holding a letter from a man who claimed to be that baby, grown up, alive, lost searching for the father he'd never known. I looked down and realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper steady. I gripped it tighter and continued reading. I don't want to shock you or cause you pain, but I've spent most of my adult life wondering where I came from. My adoptive parents were wonderful people, they raised me with love and gave me every opportunity one could have asked for. But I always felt like there was a piece missing, a question that couldn't be answered. When my adoptive mother passed away last year, I found my original birth certificate among her papers. The dates didn't match what I'd been told about my birth. There were inconsistencies in the paperwork, signatures that looked forged, and stamps that seemed wrong. It led me to believe that maybe my birth parents hadn't given me up willingly. I read that sentence 3 times, each reading hitting harder than the last. Hadn't given me up willingly. It was like someone had reached across 5 decades and lifted a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying, the weight of believing I'd lost a child to tragedy when the truth was so much more complex, so much more painful. I hired a private investigator, David continued. It took months of searching through old hospital records, church documents, and interviewing retired medical staff. Finally, I found a nurse who remembered a young couple in 1967. She said the father was a tall man with dark hair who kept asking to see his son, and the mother was a blonde woman who cried for days after being told the baby hadn't survived. The nurse said she always wondered what really happened, because the whole situation felt wrong to her. She remembered your name, Harold Thompson. She said you worked construction and drove an old blue pickup truck. She said you seemed like a good man who was trying to do right by his family. I pressed the letter against my chest, my eyes filling with tears I hadn't shed in years. That nurse, I remembered her. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she was the only person at that hospital who seemed to understand that Margaret and I were grieving parents, not just statistics to be processed and forgotten. I've been searching for you for 3 years, David wrote. I hit dead ends, found wrong addresses, and called dozens of Harold Thompsons who weren't you. A few months ago, I finally traced your name to Meadowbrook Nursing Home. I didn't want to just show up unannounced, I was afraid it might be too much of a shock. So I'm writing this letter, hoping you'll read it and remember. Remember. I almost laughed through my tears. I had never stopped remembering. I remembered the smell of the hospital, antiseptic and fear. I remembered the sound of Margaret crying herself to sleep for weeks afterward. I remembered how we never talked about it, how we buried that grief so deep it became part of our foundation, shaping everything we built on top of it. We went on to have Robert 2 years later, and we poured all our love into him, maybe too much. Maybe we held on too tight because we'd already lost one child. Maybe that's why Robert grew up feeling suffocated, why he couldn't wait to get away from us, why even now he keeps his distance like he's afraid our grief might be contagious. Dad, David wrote, and that single word broke something open in my chest. If this letter is too much, if you don't want to meet me, I understand. But if there's even a small part of you that wonders about the son you thought you lost, I'd love the chance to talk with you. Even just once. Even just for a few minutes. I have so many questions. I want to know what kind of man you are, what you were like when you were young, what you and my birth mother were like together. I want to know if I have your hands or her eyes. I want to know if you ever thought about me, if you ever wondered what I might have become. I live about 4 hours away, but I can drive down anytime. I'm retired now, I was a high school teacher for 35 years, so my schedule is flexible. If you're willing to meet me, you can call me at the number below, or just send word through the nursing home and I'll come. With hope and love, your son, David. I folded the letter carefully and sat in the growing darkness of my room, not bothering to turn on the lights. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. Most of the Christmas visitors had gone home to their own celebrations, their own families, their own warm houses filled with laughter and the promise of tomorrow. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt found. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed with the letter beside me, tucked under my pillow like a talisman. I kept reaching for it, making sure it was still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. The television played some late-night Christmas movie, but I wasn't watching. My mind had traveled back 57 years, to a young man who thought he was going to be a father and then thought he'd lost everything that mattered. I remembered the hospital room where Margaret had labored for 16 hours. I remembered pacing the waiting room, chain-smoking cigarettes and wearing a path in the linoleum floor. I remembered the doctor coming out, his face grim, telling me there had been complications. The baby didn't make it, he'd said, his words clipped and clinical. These things happen sometimes. Your wife is stable, but she'll need time to recover, both physically and emotionally. I'd asked to see him, my son. I'd wanted to hold him, even for a moment, to say goodbye properly. But they'd refused. It's better this way, they kept saying. Trust us. It's better if you don't see. I was 23 years old, working construction during the day and taking night classes to become an electrician. I didn't know about patients' rights or informed consent. I didn't know I could demand answers, demand to see my own child. I was just a scared kid who trusted that doctors knew best, that they were looking out for our welfare. Now I understood. They hadn't been protecting us from grief, they'd been covering up a crime. They'd stolen our son and told us he was dead, then placed him with another family, probably for money, probably as part of some informal adoption network that preyed on young, unwed couples who didn't know their rights. Margaret never knew. She died 3 years ago, still believing we'd lost our first baby to complications. Part of me was grateful she'd never had to learn the truth, it would have broken her heart all over again. But another part of me ached with the knowledge that she'd died without ever knowing her firstborn had grown up to be a teacher, had probably had a good life, had been searching for us. I must have dozed off sometime around dawn, because I woke to Maria bringing my breakfast tray. I hadn't touched the food from the night before, and she noticed immediately. "Mr. Thompson, are you feeling all right? You haven't eaten anything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the genuine concern in her eyes. Maria was probably 40, with kind eyes and graying hair she kept pulled back in a neat bun. She had 3 children of her own, I'd seen their pictures on her badge lanyard. She understood what it meant to love a child, to worry about them, to want the best for them. "Maria," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "That letter yesterday, it was from my son. My son who I thought died as a baby 57 years ago." She set down the breakfast tray and pulled up the chair next to my bed. "Tell me," she said simply. So I did. I told her everything, about Margaret, about the pregnancy, about the hospital, about the decades of carrying grief for a child who, it turned out, was alive. I told her about Robert, about the distance between us, about spending Christmas alone while my son who I'd raised lived his own life 40 miles away, too busy or too indifferent to visit. Maria listened without interrupting, without judgment, without trying to fix anything. When I finished, she reached over and took my weathered hand in both of hers. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to write him back," I said without hesitation. "I want to tell him. I want him to know that I never stopped thinking about him. That not a day went by that I didn't wonder what he would have looked like, what kind of man he would have become." Maria smiled. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll get you some good paper and a pen, and you can take all the time you need." She returned a few minutes later with a box of cream-colored stationery and a fountain pen that had belonged to her father. "He would have liked this," she said, setting them on the bedside table. "He always said the important letters deserved to be written properly." I sat at the small table by my window, my arthritic fingers wrapped around the pen, and began to write. "Dear David. Your letter didn't shock me, it woke me up. For 57 years, I have carried the grief of losing you. Your mother and I lit a candle for you every year on what we thought was your birthday. We never spoke about it, but we never forgot. I want you to know that we didn't give you up. They took you from us and told us you had died. We were young and didn't know we had the right to fight, to demand proof, to ask the questions that might have led us to the truth. If I had known, if I had even suspected, I would have torn that hospital apart brick by brick to find you. I paused, my eyes already blurring with tears, but I kept writing. You asked what kind of man I am. I'm the kind who worked 2 jobs to support his family, who taught his son to throw a curveball and ride a bicycle, who held his wife's hand through 48 years of marriage. I'm the kind who has wondered every day of his life what happened to his first child, who has carried your ghost in his heart for more than half a century. Yes, I want to meet you. I want to see your face and hear your voice and learn about the life you've built. I want to know if you're happy, if you're healthy, if you found love and purpose and all the things a father hopes for his child. If you're willing to make the drive, I'm here every day. I'm not going anywhere. With all my love, your father, Harold. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote David's address in my most careful handwriting. Maria promised to mail it that afternoon, and as she walked toward the door, I called out to her. Do you think he'll still want to see me? After all these years? Maria turned back, her eyes soft with understanding. Mr. Thompson, that man spent years searching for you. He found out where you were and wrote you a letter on Christmas Day. That's not the behavior of someone who's going to change his mind. She was right. For the first time since Margaret died, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen. The days that followed were different. I woke up each morning with something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation. I found myself checking the lobby for mail, asking Maria if there had been any phone calls, watching the parking lot with new eyes. I wasn't just waiting to die anymore, I was waiting to live. On the 3rd day after I'd sent my letter, Maria knocked on my door with a smile that told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. Phone call for you, Mr. Thompson. It's your son. My hands shook as I took the receiver. Hello. Dad? The voice was deep, warm, uncertain. This is David. I got your letter. David. I said his name like a prayer, like a word I'd been waiting my whole life to speak. You called. I cried when I read what you wrote, he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. I've been sitting in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to come inside. You're here. I looked toward the window, as if I could see him from my 2nd-floor room. You're here now. If that's okay. I know it's short notice, but I couldn't wait. I couldn't spend another day wondering. Come up, I said, my voice breaking. Please. Come up and let me see you. I hung up the phone and looked around my room with new eyes. It seemed suddenly shabby, inadequate. I smoothed down my hair, straightened my cardigan, tried to make myself presentable for the son I'd never seen. Maria appeared in the doorway. He's on his way up, she said gently. Are you ready? I wasn't. How could anyone be ready for something like this? But I nodded anyway. And then he was there, standing in my doorway, a tall man with graying hair and my father's nose, wearing a nervous smile and carrying a small wrapped package. He had Margaret's eyes, the same blue-green that used to catch the light when she laughed. For a moment, we just stared at each other, 2 strangers connected by blood and separated by decades of deception. Then he stepped forward, and I struggled to my feet, and we fell into an embrace that felt like coming home after the longest journey imaginable. He was solid and warm and real, and when he whispered, "Dad," against my shoulder, I broke down completely. Not with sadness, but with overwhelming relief. My son was alive. My son was here. My son had found me. We talked for hours that first day. He told me about his adoptive parents, who had given him a good life but had always been honest about his adoption. He told me about his career teaching high school English, about his love of books and baseball and classical music. He told me about his wife, Sarah, who had encouraged him to search for his birth parents, and about his 2 children, my grandchildren, who were eager to meet their grandfather. I told him about Margaret, about how much she would have loved him, about how she'd always set an extra place at the table during holidays, just in case. I told him about Robert, about the complicated relationship I had with the son I'd raised, about how different things might have been if we'd known David was alive. "I don't want to take anything away from Robert," David said carefully. "I know this must be complicated for your family." "You're not taking anything away," I assured him. "You're giving something back. You're giving me back a piece of myself I thought was lost forever." He showed me pictures of his children, Emma, 16, and Michael, 14. They had his eyes and Margaret's smile, and they wanted to meet their grandfather as soon as possible. "They've always known I was adopted," David explained. "They've been part of this search from the beginning. Emma especially, she's the one who encouraged me to hire the private investigator when I was ready to give up." Before he left that day, he handed me the small package he'd been carrying. "I brought this for you," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me, but I wanted to be prepared just in case." Inside was a photo album, filled with pictures spanning David's entire life. Baby photos, school pictures, graduation portraits, wedding photos, pictures of him with his children. A whole life documented in snapshots, a life I should have been part of, but wasn't. "I thought you might want to catch up," he said with a shy smile. I held the album against my chest and wept. 57 years of missed birthdays, missed milestones, missed moments. But David was here now, and he wasn't going anywhere. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised as he prepared to leave. "If that's okay with you." "It's more than okay," I told him. "It's everything." That evening, I called Robert. It was the first time I'd initiated contact with him in months, and he seemed surprised to hear my voice. "Dad? Is everything okay? Are you sick?" "I'm fine, son. Better than fine, actually. I have something to tell you." I told him about David, about the letter, about the son he'd never known he had. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You had another kid?" Robert finally said. "When? How?" I explained about the pregnancy before Robert was born, about believing the baby had died, about learning the truth after all these years. Robert listened without interrupting, but I could hear the confusion and maybe some resentment in his breathing. "So you're telling me I have a brother I never knew about, and now he's back, and you're, what? Replacing me with him?" "Oh, son," I said, my heart breaking for him. "No one could ever replace you. David isn't here to take your place, he's here to fill a space that's been empty for 57 years. There's room in my heart for both of you." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I need to think about this, Dad. This is, a lot." "I understand," I said. "Take all the time you need." "But Robert? I love you. That will never change, no matter what." After I hung up, I sat with David's photo album in my lap, slowly turning pages and trying to piece together the life my son had lived without me. Here he was as a gap-toothed 7-year-old holding a baseball glove. Here he was in his high school graduation cap and gown, grinning proudly. Here he was on his wedding day, looking nervous and happy as he kissed his bride. I should have been there for all of it. I should have taught him to shave, helped him with his homework, walked him down the aisle. But I wasn't, and no amount of regret could change that. All I could do was be grateful for the time we had left and try to make the most of it. David came back the next day, and the day after that. On the weekend, he brought Sarah, a warm woman with kind eyes who hugged me like I was already part of the family. The following week, he brought Emma and Michael, my grandchildren, who were curious and polite and wonderfully, miraculously real. Emma looked like Margaret had at that age, tall and slender with long blonde hair and those same blue-green eyes. Michael was stockier, with David's dark hair and serious expression, but when he smiled, he lit up the room just like his grandfather used to do. "Grandpa Harold," Emma said, trying out the words. "It feels weird, but good weird. Like a puzzle piece finally fitting into place." That's exactly what it felt like something that had been broken for decades was finally being made whole. 3 months later, David and Sarah invited me to move in with them. They'd converted their den into a bedroom, installed grab bars in the bathroom, and researched the best care options in their area. "We want you close," David said simply. "We've lost enough time already." I looked around my room at Meadowbrook, at the few possessions that had defined my world for the past 3 years. It would be easy to leave this place. What was harder was leaving the safety of low expectations, the familiar routine of waiting for nothing in particular. But David was offering me something I'd thought was gone forever, a place in a family, a role in the lives of people who wanted me there not out of obligation, but out of love. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I'd like that very much." On moving day, Robert showed up unexpectedly. I hadn't seen him in person in over a year, and he looked older, more tired than I remembered. He helped carry my few boxes to David's car, moving with the careful politeness of someone who wasn't sure where he fit in this new reality. David extended his hand. "You must be Robert." "I'm David. I'm glad to finally meet you." Robert looked at his half-brother for a long moment, then shook his hand. "Yeah. This is strange." "I know," David said gently. "It's strange for me too. But I hope we can figure it out together." They talked for a few minutes, awkward but genuine, while I watched from my wheelchair and marveled at the sight of my 2 sons in the same space. They didn't look much alike. Robert favored Margaret's family, while David looked more like my side, but they both had the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking, the same habit of running their hands through their hair when they were nervous. "Take care of him," Robert said to David as they finished loading the car. He's a good father. Better than I gave him credit for." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Now I live with David and Sarah in their house with the blue shutters and the creaky porch swing. My bedroom overlooks their backyard, where Sarah has planted a garden full of flowers Margaret would have loved. Emma practices violin in the evenings, and Michael shows me card tricks he learns from YouTube videos. David and I watch baseball games together and argue about politics and share stories about our respective lives. I'm 80 years old, and I'm finally living again instead of just waiting to die. Sometimes I think about the man I was before that Christmas letter, lonely, forgotten, resigned to being nothing more than a burden to be managed. He deserved better than the ending he thought he was getting. He deserved to know that his son was alive, that he was loved, that his story wasn't over yet. Robert visits sometimes now, usually on Sundays. He and David are slowly building a relationship, finding common ground in their shared concern for me and their mutual love of terrible action movies. Robert's children, my other grandchildren, are starting to warm up to the idea of having a grandfather who isn't just a name on birthday cards anymore. It's not perfect. There's still awkwardness, still unresolved hurt on all sides. But it's real, and it's growing, and it's more than I ever dared to hope for during those long, empty years at Meadowbrook. Last Christmas, I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by family, David and Sarah, Emma and Michael, even Robert and his kids. We cooked together, opened presents together, took photos together. For the first time in decades, Christmas felt like celebration instead of endurance. And this Christmas, as I sit in David's living room watching my grandchildren argue over a board game while Sarah hums carols in the kitchen, I think about the letter that changed everything. It didn't just give me back my son, it gave me back my life, my purpose, my reason for getting up in the morning. Sometimes the most important moments come disguised as ordinary ones. A nurse handing you a letter. A phone call from a stranger who turns out to be everything you've been missing. A knock on the door that opens not just your room, but your entire world. I thought my story was ending, but it turns out it was just beginning a new chapter. And this chapter, the one where I'm not just a forgotten old man in a nursing home, but a father, a grandfather, a vital part of a family that loves me, this is the best chapter yet. The letter that changed everything taught me that it's never too late for miracles, never too late for second chances, never too late to discover that you're not forgotten after all. You're just waiting for the right person to find you and remind you who you really are. I am Harold Thompson. I am 80 years old. I have 2 sons, 4 grandchildren, and a daughter-in-law who makes the best apple pie I've ever tasted. I have a past full of love and loss, and a future full of possibility. And it all started with a letter delivered on Christmas Day by a nurse who understood that sometimes the smallest gestures can rebuild entire worlds.